There's probably a number in your practice that you either don't know or you're not sure about. It's not your revenue. It's not the number of referrals. It isn't your appointment volume. It's this. It's how many people started on the journey to become a patient of yours and never either made it to your schedule, showed up for their appointment, or showed up for subsequent appointments. Somewhere along the way, they got lost. Every single practice has these patients. And there are numerous places where patients can fall through the cracks. In today's episode, we're going to identify the top contenders, as well as the cost to your practice, what your competitors are doing to alleviate that same challenge, and you're going to get a 3-step action plan. If we haven't met yet, I'm Alisa Conner, and I show up every week to help both specialty medical practices and professional service organizations grow, not by outspending their competitors, but instead by creating patient and customer experiences that your patients and customers can't wait to talk about. These numbers don't show up on your financial statements, and they don't show up in your marketing reports, but they can make the difference between what you're producing now and what you have the potential to be producing as a practice. Today, we're going to investigate that gap, not by looking at assumptions, not by looking through a marketing lens, but instead with math. More often than not, when I look at practices and I'm either analyzing them through an assessment or they're asking me to take a look at their leak areas, what I find is their immediate solution to growth is to invest in more marketing, whether that's running more ads, updating their website, improving their SEO, all of those different things. But what they're not ever looking at is how they can improve the conversion of the people that have already said yes to being patients, but have somewhere along the way fallen through the cracks. The problem with focusing your practice on a ad-based growth strategy is you're running up against quite a few hurdles. And I wanted to give you the 3 top reasons that it's likely not working for you and the things that I see as I assess practices before I work with them. The first challenge is that most practices are running their advertising strategy from the perspective of, hey, our schedules are empty. We need to run some ads and get some people in here. And it's really fly by the seat of your pants, and there's not a whole lot of planning behind it. Unfortunately, when you're running ads, you need to have momentum for those ads. You need to have time to test, and you need to see what's working and what's not working, so that you're not just getting a bunch of random clicks from people that are never going to become patients, or putting money to put those ads in front of new audiences when they don't really tell a story of who your practice is or what you can do for those people. So the number one thing that you're working up against is momentum. The second is you're in a really crowded market space. Think about the last time you were on social media. How many ads did you see within the first 5 minutes you were scrolling? Chances are pretty high you saw at least 3 to 10 ads, depending on how long you were scrolling. Every third or fourth scroll point in a social media feed seems to be advertising. And frankly, I blame marketers. That's kind of a double-edged sword for me because I've spent a lot of my time and career in marketing. However, marketers have ruined online advertising because they took advantage of it and created this ecosphere where they put every single person into an online ad. Now we have audiences that just frankly scroll past, aren't interested, and if they do click, it usually doesn't go anywhere. And if it does, it's very product specific. It's not usually a very good conversion for service-based businesses, which is exactly who I work with and I talk to, including medical practices. So you're competing with all of those quick clicks, whether you're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or any of those places. You're competing with all of the other ads out there, and they have to be so compelling that 1, people don't feel like it's an advertisement, and 2, it makes them want to take action right then and there. So you're competing in that space, which is very, very crowded. And the third reason that I find it, this is probably the most disappointing to me, is that most practices are running ads right straight into a leaky bucket. And what I mean by that is that they haven't optimized the patient journey for someone to come in from cold advertising. Now, if we're looking at the buyer's journey for patients, for products, for services, whatever that is, people don't just come from an ad and trust you with their healthcare, for example. You have to build that trust. And putting ads in front of people, yes, it might bring awareness to your brand, but most of those people are not going to jump into booking an appointment with you from a Facebook ad, for example. And if they go to your website and find it hard to maneuver, don't find anything that's relevant to them or what they're struggling with on your website immediately, or you make it hard to schedule, they're out of there. You have essentially wasted the money that you have used to bring them to you by sending them to a leaky bucket. Most practices either haven't taken the time or don't want to take the time to close the gap between I need help and becoming a patient. And that right there is a huge differentiator in what your revenue could look like versus what it looks like today. Let me preface that statement with some empathy and relate it to what's going on in the private equity buyout. Physicians went to medical school to learn to heal people. They didn't go to medical school with the intention of becoming business majors or business aficionados. However, once they started their practice or they've been in a practice, they find themselves faced with everyday decisions for roles that they are neither qualified or prepared for, but they're doing their very best. So I want to give them kudos for taking on those roles, even though it's not in their wheelhouse. But unfortunately, who you're competing against in the private equity space, that's what they do all day, every day. They buy up companies, they chew them up, and they spit them out. And their main focus is profit. They don't care about patients. They don't care about patient experience. And they frankly don't even care about their staff, team, employees, or the doctors. They care about making money. I have hopes of sharing some of the knowledge I have acquired over the 20 plus years that I have been in business with the medical community so that maybe you're not just walking around blindly anymore and you have some direction when you're forced into these roles. Or you can make better hiring decisions to bring in people that can help you grow that maybe don't have the medical education that you're used to, because we seem to assume that you have to be medically trained in order to work in a medical office. And in business, you actually can help practices thrive more if you don't have that medical experience, because you're bringing a new perspective into the practice that allows you to run the practice as a business and let the doctors get back to what they're good at, which is healing people. With that in mind, let's dive into the problem areas and the 3 places that patients disappear. Now, there are certain numbers that your practice should keep an eye on when you're wondering where patients are going and why they're not going completely through the journey. Most patient journeys in medical practices have not been optimized or thought through. They usually contain the normal places. How many referrals came in, where are referrals coming from, how many phone calls did they get that day, how many of those phone calls turned into patients, how many of those patients that are initial consults became surgical patients, for example, and how many continued through physical therapy if it gets that far. But there are so many other components to the patient journey that are being left out, and those equate to revenue. And so I want to give you some places to look at when you're looking at numbers for your practice to make sure that you have a full viewpoint of where revenue is coming in and where it's leaking out. I'm not saying that the numbers that are being tracked are not important. Of course they are. It's important to know how many calls came in, but isn't it as important to know how many calls never made it to the front desk or never made it to book an appointment? Maybe they got online and started filling it out and stopped at field 2. That's a lost patient. Those are the numbers I'm talking about that haven't been built into the journey. And this is where, when patients fall off, They're the transitions between being a referral and becoming a patient, and they're not being measured. But what isn't understood typically at the medical practice level is that every single one of those decisions is part of the journey. And if somebody falls off at any given point of this 7 different areas that they not only won't become a patient, but then you don't have the opportunity to continue to serve them long term, or even worse, they're never going to refer anybody your way. That's free marketing. I don't know why you would want that to disappear. So let's talk about the 7 ways that patients come into a practice. Number 1 is referrals. Number 2 is after they've made contact. They may get a referral from their primary physician, but if they never reach out and make contact or you don't contact them, there's the gap. That's where they're going. Nobody's talked to them. The third is when they have an appointment scheduled and you think, it's smooth sailing here until they never show up for their appointment. They scheduled, but then they either don't show up, they cancel, or they never reschedule, whatever it is. They never get to appointment completed. And if they don't get to appointment completed, it's very hard to keep them moving through the process. That especially is really hard to get them the treatment they need so that they can feel better, which is where the real kudos come in when they're happy with your practice. People come to you because they don't feel well. If you can't get them feeling better, what are the chances they're going to tell other people about how great you are? Slim to none. And then this is where the ball is more often dropped than not, is there's never any follow-up with those patients after treatment, and very few referrals or follow-up with the referrals that they do send. And last but not least was one that I'm going to talk about in next week's episode, which is the repeat patient. I read a statistic recently that less than 50% of patients stick with a surgeon after 5 years. That means you're having to consistently rebuild your patient roles every 5 years, like probably every year. Wouldn't it be easier to not have to rebuild every year and instead stay in front of those people and let them send people your way, and also keep them top of mind, especially if you're in orthopedics? Like, the chance that somebody's going to have a shoulder surgery and not need another surgery after that because they're active is probably really low. Like, they're probably going to need multiple surgeries, especially if they're of a certain age. Why wouldn't you nurture that relationship so that they stay and not go to your competitors? Stay tuned for next week's episode, because there's some great learning points in that episode, and it's based on a conversation that I had with somebody who just went through that scenario. The sad part of all of this is that most practices don't have any idea where patients are falling out or how many patients are falling out of every stage. And that's not a diss on them. It's because they're busy and they have other things to focus on, and this hasn't been anybody's priority. But growth should be every practice's priority. There should always be at least 1, 2, 3 people in a practice that are focused on growth, because if you don't focus on it, it's not going to happen. So let's next look at the 3 places where patients disappear. The first place where patients can disappear is the referral to patient gap. And we've talked about this before, but the one thing that I want to emphasize here is that when you are bringing a lead in from cold marketing, whether that's an ad or your website or social media presence or whatever it is that you're using to put your name, face, and brand in front of new people, there's a trust factor missing there. Like, just because you have a lead doesn't mean that they automatically trust you with their care, versus a referral from somebody they do trust coming to your front door. The trust factor is already built in, whether that's their primary physician, another physician, a family friend, whatever that might be. That referral is coming to you and has overcome the trust objection, because somebody they know trusts you. They're going to more likely trust you quicker and easier than coming from cold traffic. But many practices that I look at and engage with. Treat referrals like a administrative task. They're just something to deal with. There's no process or proactiveness around those referrals. Those are the lifeline of your business. And yet nothing has been done intentionally to ensure that those people are well received, that they're taken care of, and that they make it all the way through the process. Things that I would ask if I were working with your practice, and then I do ask practices that I work with, are how quickly are referrals contacted? Is it proactive from your end, or do you just wait for them to reach out to you? Who owns that process? Does anybody? Does anybody own that process? Most times the answer is no. Nobody owns it, and no, they're not reaching out proactively. If they do, the next question I ask is, well, how many times? How many times do you reach out to them? How many times do you see if they're ready to book or leave a message, or do you email? Like, what's your process around that? How many times do you reach out, and what does it look like? Are you meeting them in the way that they want to communicate? And then the next thing that I ask is it obvious to the patient what happens next? Like, from both the referral partner and like, this is before they get on the schedule. This is what happens, like, if they get busy, and does the referral expire? Does it, are there different rules and regulations around it? And if so, is that communicated to them? Do your referral partners communicate that with them? Or are you just leaving it to chance? And last but not least, the question that I ask here is the referral process the same for every referral that comes through the door? Is it consistent? Is there a process? Or is it just Sally's doing it today, Tracy's doing it tomorrow, and it's fly by the seat of your pants and whoever gets it done? Because that last scenario is more often the case. And that's why you're losing referrals. There is no consistency, and no one's thought through it from the patient perspective. This isn't just a scheduling problem. This is a trust problem, because if you aren't building trust along an optimized process like that and making it very apparent that those people are important to you from the beginning, the trust that they had already established with their primary care provider or the person that referred them slowly evaporates. The second place where you're likely leaking revenue is the schedule to show up rate. And I would say of all of the leakage areas, this is probably one of the ones that practices are most aware of. And they likely have attempted to fix the no-show rate. Unfortunately, what I find is that even though they've tried to fix it, they've used the same methodology that everybody else uses. And when I say everybody else, I'm not just saying other practices, I'm saying every person under the sun. Whether that's your pizza delivery, your Amazon package, or an appointment with your dentist or doctor. When it's the same, guess what people do? They ignore it because it's just one more thing that's like everyone else. And so what's great about this area is that you've overcome a lot of objections already. They've taken the time, they've booked an appointment, they got through any kind of hurdles that were there around booking an appointment. They're on the schedule. They're ready to go. Chances are pretty high that your office has in some way, shape, or form sent them reminders. But there are other things that can cause friction in this area. And that is, was it easy for them to get an appointment quickly and soon? Where people fall off is when they have to wait weeks or months to get an appointment. I just had this happen with me. I went to the dentist and had a tooth that has been bothering me next to a crown that he worked on before. And when I went to book the appointment, she's like, yeah, the soonest we can see you is like the end of September. Right now, recording this is the beginning of July. So I was like, wow, that's like 2.5 months out. And what was the most surprising to me about that was that, like, when I talked to the dentist, it was like, yeah, we'll see you soon. And I was like, soon to me is next week. Soon to him is September. And so the disconnect on communication there can cause challenges and problems. And I'm not in a rush, like it's not bothering me that much that I need to be there right away. But if I was expecting a couple of days or a couple of weeks and it's 2.5 months out, there's a communication disconnect between what my expectations were and what they are can actually provide. The other piece of area that there can be friction is if somebody needs to make a change to their appointment. How easy is it for them to cancel or reschedule their appointment on their own? Do they have to call in? And if they have to call in, do they have to sit on hold for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Well, your office gets through the rest of the calls. Or if they leave a message, does it take 2, 3, 4 hours or a few days to get back to them? Because if that is the case, then you're definitely losing people here. The other area here where you can lose patients is if they don't have clear expectations set for them or they don't understand the expectations. And this can be anything from filling out paperwork or needing imagery done that they need to take care of on their own, or different approvals that need to happen through, say, their insurance company before things can move forward. If those aren't clearly communicated, then that can cause friction and they may choose to go to a different provider. And then the last part is more of a personal connection. And that is if they don't feel connected to not only the physician, but his team and the staff and the people that work within the practice, they may be like, this doesn't feel right to me. I'm going to move on. And that is often the case. I hear from people, I love my doctor. I hate his team. And maybe hate is a strong word, but they severely dislike, whoever it is. It could be the PA, it could be the person who's doing physical therapy with him, whatever it might be. In my case, my challenge with my dentist, actually, and I brought it to his attention, was it's his dental assistant. The last couple of times, including this time with my tooth, she's screwed up my teeth because I frankly don't think she knows what she's doing. Now, mind you, I have been a patient of this practice for at least 25 years. The original doctor that owned the practice loved him. He retired, loved his assistant. And it's not that I need dental work all the time, but when I do, I always felt very confident. The new dentist that took over, love him, really like him, but part of his team, he has not done a good job of vetting his team, and he's not listening to his patients when it comes to his team. And unfortunately, he's making decisions based on seniority within the practice instead of making decisions based on who's going to be the best option for his patients. And I can't imagine, I haven't asked him, but I can't imagine that isn't hurting his practice. All of these challenges are reasons that patients or potential patients leave your practice. But when you treat scheduling and the front desk responsibilities as just an admin task, you're leaving opportunity and potential revenue on the table. And that could make or break you meeting your goals, your revenue goals and your profit goals specifically for this year, next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and on down the line. Let's dive into the third area where patients are lost. And this is a biggie. And I know I talk a lot about patient experience, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about patient and client experience, but what usually happens in organizations, and this is true of medical practices as well, is that the entire journey for patients isn't thought through. And if it is, it isn't optimized to the point where that patient feels like they're in the right place and that these are their people and that they have made the best choice for not only them, but for anybody that they send your way. And this patient experience can go splendidly all the way through treatment, and they love the surgeon, they love, everybody along the way, all the people that worked with them, whether that was like getting them a cast or with imaging or PT or what, all of those things, and then have it completely fall apart when they get a bill in the mail that they hadn't expected. They can't get a hold of someone. They've left voicemails. They get put on hold. Nobody's returning their calls. That is just blown apart all of the work that came before it. And when we aren't looking at that entire process, that doesn't even stop there. It doesn't even stop at billing. And that's what I try to get through to people is we have to orchestrate that entire experience for our patients and our customers, frankly. And if we haven't, we're definitely leaving money on the table. Some questions that you can ask yourself about your patient experience along the way. And this is anywhere between, going through treatment or getting treatment to becoming a repeat patient is, was it easy to work with you? Did they like your team? Were there people on your team that they didn't like? And did anybody bother to find that out? Did they feel taken care of? Did the practice anticipate their needs and their future needs? And I had a really interesting, it was kind of like a TED talk that came across my Instagram feed a couple weeks ago. And it kind of stopped me in my tracks because it was a guy that was talking about Trader Joe's. And he said, when you go to Trader Joe's and you go up to the counter, they ask you to, or they ask you one question every single time, and then they're required to do one other thing. And he asked the audience, does anybody know what those things are? Nobody knew. He said, the first thing they ask you is, what are you doing later today? How many times have you gone? No, first stop and take that in for a minute. Because when you go to most stores, what's the thing they ask? Hey, did you find everything okay? It's just autopilot. All it does is it's a closed ended question. Yes or no? Sometimes somebody will say, no, I didn't find the ketchup, or whatever it is. Usually it doesn't go anywhere because nobody's involved in the conversation. But what Trader Joe's did was stop and make people think by asking an open-ended question, which was, what are you doing later today? It wasn't about the shopping experience. It wasn't about what was on the shelves. It was about them. The second thing, if you haven't seen this, it'll be a surprise to you, but the second thing they were required to do was make a comment about something that buyer had on the conveyor belt that they were buying. So, for example, hey, I see you have these egg rolls. Have you tried them with the spicy chili sauce? Like I tried them the other day. I'd never had them with that, and they were really good. And we only have that spicy chili sauce like twice a year, so I always try to grab it when it's here. And like whatever, and it doesn't even have to be pushing another product. It can just be like, hey, I didn't even know that we had those ice cream cones back. I'm so excited. And they have strawberry this year. Can you believe it? And like it's another connection point. Now, when I watched the video, what was most interesting to me is they're like, so do you think Trader Joe's just came up with those one day and said, hey, this is the experience we're going to offer? Absolutely not. It probably took them years to come up with these two questions, but it's something that you can think about with your practice about like how you can provide that kind of experience for your patients. Because which practice would you choose? The one that's invested in you and your health and what's going on in your world, or the one that's like, did you find everything okay? You already know the answer to this. You already know. And so I want to inspire you with that story and help you imagine what it could be like for your office. And one of the best ways to bring that into a reality is by getting things off your plate. And one of the only ways to get things off your plate, I don't care what size of business you are or what kind of business you have, one of the only ways to make your plate less full is to optimize and create processes for your business and then assign those processes to every person. Like every person has a process. It's not just we hired Joe to do this and then he got like 15 other things thrown on his plate because they showed up one day. That's not running a business. That's like flying by the seat of your pants. And it's no wonder you're exhausted. What patient experience becomes for every type of organization is an opportunity for growth or an opportunity for the relationship to end. What the Trader Joe's example shows us is that they've taken that opportunity and built growth into it. And you have the same opportunity in front of you. So if you tune in every week, I like to relate these episodes straight to math. And I told you we were going to do math today. So here we are. And this is the portion of the show that I lovingly call practice math. And that's because it's math that relates not only to average statistics in the industry, but also the opportunity for you to look at your own numbers and calculate what it means for you. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. And let's just look at some average numbers that I just came up with off the top of my head, because it's this specific math is going to be different for every practice because only you know how many referrals you get exactly. So we're going to leave the math a little bit more generic today because I really want you to plug in your numbers. And I actually created a free download for this section. If you want to go grab it to calculate your exact numbers for referrals, you can do that. And it's at alisaconner.com/worksheet. I will link it in the podcast description as well as in the show notes on YouTube and in the blog article. So you can go grab it and then you can do this math for yourself. But we're just going to take average numbers. So if your practice on a monthly basis receives 500 referrals, we're just going to use 500. And 40% of those referrals never turn into patients. We're going to do 500 times 40%. That's 200 patients a month that are falling through the cracks. Now, if you calculate your average patient value for 200 patients, and typically this is per doctor. And when I'm looking at orthopedics, like most surgeons see between 300 and 500 patients a month. And so that's where I came up with the 500. If we're just looking at 500, 40% of those people, and it's usually higher than that, never make it onto the schedule. You have 200 patients roughly that are never making it through the door. They're either going to a competitor, they're not doing anything, whatever's happening to them, they're not spending money with your practice. If your average cost, and I want to add a new factor into this, and that is typically when we're looking at specifically orthopedics, we're only calculating on surgery. But I want to take it further down the line because most patients that go through a surgical procedure don't stop at surgery. They have costs before and costs after, and maybe even costs down the line. Things like imaging, things like follow-up visits, things like physical therapy or accoutrements that they have to get, like casts and crutches and all of those different things. Those are all costs that if your practice can provide them, you're losing money when they walk out the door. And so I'm going to up the ante a little bit this week to $7,000 a patient. That's probably still low. But even if you're at $7,000 a patient times 200 patients a month, you're at 1.4 million monthly per doctor that you're losing that's walking out the door. And latest research shows that over half of referrals never make it onto the schedule. Now, I'm not delusional enough to believe that every person that's referred to you is going to turn into a patient. Even if we cut that number in half, it's over $700,000 a month per physician in your office of revenue that is walking out the door that you will never recover by running ads. It's never going to be recovered by fixing your website, adding SEO. Doesn't matter what you spend in marketing. If you can't keep the people that are already loyal to you going through the process with your practice. If you could take that number and let's just, we'll even cut it back to $500,000 a month. What does that mean to your practice growth? What does that mean to the ability to compete against private equity? What does that mean for how you attract the doctors that you want to bring into your practice. Those are all things to think about and envision because they're all within your grasp if you have somebody to guide you along creating that journey. And so, and you're looking at the math and you're like, okay, well, I don't even know where to start with this. This is exactly why I give you a 3-step action plan. And this week's no different. So let's dive into what it is. Step number 1 is to stop looking at outcomes and instead look at what is leading to the revenue you're already creating. What are the steps leading there? Like, if you don't know your numbers, it's really hard to know where you're leaving money. And if you don't know where people are falling out of the process and you're just looking at the bottom line of the number of people that did get to completion, there's no way to know how many people you lost along the way. And so becoming aware of all of the places that touch your patients and then creating a map for people to follow and make sure that people don't get lost along the way on the map so that you are converting more of those people. And the best way to create this map, it's going to sound so old school, but it really is the best way because it enables everybody on your team to give their input and it's visually less confusing for people to follow along, but it's to write it out on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, both, whatever it is. If you can draw this visually and you can create all of the stops along your treasure map, your patient treasure map, for lack of a better term, people will know where to plug in and be able to give you insights and perspective from where they show up on the map. Places to include on the map: referrals received, how long it took to respond to those referrals, scheduling, like are people falling off during scheduling? Where are they falling off? A lot of people have never even looked at their scheduling. They've never even tried to schedule their practice. If you haven't, that is gold. Like, go do it right now. You're going to learn so much about where people are getting stuck. Once people have an appointment, what happens? Like, they just go off into la-la. Do they get a card that they lose immediately while they're getting into their car? Or is there a backup plan? And what is the backup plan? Does it look like everybody else's? So if it does, and you're not Trader Joe's and asking the right questions or putting it in front of them in a different and unique way, you're getting ignored. I can guarantee it, which is why people aren't showing up. When it comes to treatment, are people falling off there? Are there certain places where they fall off? Is it financial? I mean, I don't know the answers to these. You have to ask these for your practice. And then when it comes to following up with patients, both current and previous, do you have a system in place? Do you have a process? What happens? They go to PT and then they do their 5 to 10 sessions and then they're never heard from again. It's exactly what happened to me. Nobody ever followed up with me. I was supposed to go back and have another follow-up visit with my doc and never rescheduled. Nobody ever followed up. Nobody ever asked, hey, how's it going? Did your ankle better? Which it's not, but anyway, that's a story for another day. And then the last step of your process is to choose the biggest breakdown and figure out how you're going to fix it in the next 30, 60, 90 days. Some of these fixes are going to take longer and some of them will be short, but you have to have a plan. So find the biggest leak and start to plug that one first. The practices that grow the most and have the most consistent growth are not always those that have the highest number of lead generation or the most demand. It's those that care for their patients and those that are concerned about the journey that each of those patients is going on from the perspective of what the physician wants for them. The physicians in practices are the ones that care about the well-being of their patients. I'm not saying the rest of the team doesn't, but they're not as invested in the health and well-being because that's what doctors are trained for. Your patients are giving you clues about why they're leaving and where they're leaving. It's up to you to follow the clues and figure out where that's happening and what to do about it. More often than not, they've left you evidence, and it's up to you to find the evidence so that you can improve the journey and identify where your next opportunity is. But most often, practices have a hard time seeing this. And it's not because they're not aware, and it's not because they don't care. It's because they are living in that practice day in and day out. And it's really hard to see things from a different perspective when you're in it every single day, which is exactly what I bring to the table, which is a new outside perspective and one that is not based from a medical background. It's based from a business background. My offer to you is a 20-minute triage call. And it's a free call. I sit down with practice administrators and often physician owners, and we identify the 3 places that you're leaking the most revenue. And on that call, you're going to know exactly where you need to start plugging leaks. And you're going to get a quick 3-step action plan, kind of similar to what we do on these episodes, to help you get started. If you'd like to book that call, I would be honored to be the person that helps you not only plug those leaks, but optimize your growth and the potential for your practice. And the link to book that call is right below this video, as well as in the podcast description and the blog post that accompanies each episode. In the meantime, I appreciate you tuning in this week and every week. And if you found value in this episode, I would love for you to share it with someone else so that they can reap the value too. I will see you next week. It's going to be a great episode. I'm bringing a real life story to the show to not only talk about patient experience, but also experience from a previous patient and where things just about went wrong. So tune in next week for that show. In the meantime, have a great week. Take care. Be well. See you soon.